The breaking point. Have you ever stood in your own kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that has already gone cold, and wondered how something you loved so much ended up feeling this heavy? This video is about those moments. About love that almost broke, a marriage that nearly ended, children who noticed more than we thought, and the quiet choice to fight instead of walking away. It is also about learning again, learning to listen, to speak, and to understand, slowly, gently, one sentence at a time. 2 weeks ago, here in the United States, my marriage reached a point I never imagined it would. Not with a dramatic fight. Not with shouting or slammed doors. But with silence. And silence, you learn very quickly, can be louder than anger. You wake up one morning, and the house feels different. The same walls. The same light coming through the window. But something inside you is off. Your body knows it before your mind admits it. You walk past the person you promised forever to, and you nod. Just a nod. No smile. No good morning. It feels small, almost harmless. But small things repeated are how distance is built. You tell yourself you're just tired. Work has been heavy. Life in a foreign country adds pressure. Bills. School schedules. The endless mental list that never turns off. And yet, deep down, you know this tiredness is different. This one sits in your chest. In those days, I noticed something strange. I could still talk to people at work. I could still answer emails. I could still use English just fine. But when it came to my partner, my words disappeared. It was as if my emotional vocabulary had shrunk to zero. And maybe you know this feeling too. When you want to say something important, but your mouth chooses silence because silence feels safer. Psychologists talk about something called emotional shutdown. When the brain senses too much stress, it chooses protection over connection. Your nervous system isn't trying to ruin your marriage. It's trying to keep you from pain. The problem is, protection looks a lot like distance. That week, our home became a place of routines, not warmth. Breakfast happened. Dishes were washed. The kids got ready for school. From the outside, everything looked normal. Inside, it felt like we were roommates carefully avoiding each other's emotional space. And here's the uncomfortable truth. This is usually the moment people give up. Not when things explode, but when they quietly fade. Because fading doesn't demand action. It doesn't force a decision. It lets you drift. You might be wondering what this has to do with learning English. More than you think. Because learning a language and saving a relationship fail for the same reason. People stop showing up when it feels uncomfortable. When progress is slow. When mistakes feel embarrassing. When silence feels easier than trying again. I remember sitting alone in the car one evening, engine off, just breathing. My phone was in my hand. I could text something simple. Are you okay? 3 easy words. Basic English. Basic human connection. But my thumb wouldn't move. My brain offered excuses. Not now. It won't help. You'll make it worse. That's the brain again. Always efficient. Always lazy. It avoids effort when effort feels risky. Neuroscience explains this beautifully. The brain loves familiarity. Even painful familiarity feels safer than uncertain change. So it keeps you stuck in patterns that don't work anymore, just because they are known. This is true in marriage. This is true in language learning. You stay quiet because quiet is familiar. The breaking point came not with a fight, but with a thought. A very calm, very clear thought, we could actually end this. And once that thought exists, you can't unthink it. It sits there, like a door slightly open. That night, I looked at my children while they slept. They were peaceful, unaware, or maybe more aware than we give them credit for. Studies show children can sense emotional tension even when adults try to hide it. Their brains are constantly scanning for safety. Silence teaches them something too. And suddenly, the story wasn't just about two adults who were tired. It was about what kind of emotional language we were modeling. Was silence the answer? Was avoidance the lesson? This is where many people expect a big dramatic moment. Tears, confessions, promises. But real life rarely works that way. Real change usually starts smaller, quieter, with awareness. That night, nothing was fixed. We didn't solve our marriage. We didn't hug it out. But something shifted. The illusion that silence was harmless broke. And once that illusion breaks, you can't go back. If you are listening to this while trying to learn English, feeling frustrated, stuck, or embarrassed by slow progress, I want you to notice the parallel. You're not bad at English. Your brain is just protecting you from discomfort. And protection feels like stopping. The breaking point is not failure. It's information. It tells you very clearly that the old way no longer works. And here's the quiet punchline no one tells you. Relationships don't end because people stop loving. They end because people stop trying to speak. Silent mornings. Imagine waking up to the sound of your alarm and realizing that the quiet in your house feels heavier than your body. Not peaceful quiet. Not calm. The kind of quiet that presses on your chest like an invisible weight. Morning light slips through the window, soft and innocent, completely unaware that something fragile is happening inside your family. This is where our story stayed for several days. In the mornings. In the silence. Mornings used to be our reset button. Coffee brewing. Someone forgetting where the keys were. A quick laugh before the rush of the day. But during those 2 weeks in the United States, mornings became careful. Controlled. Everyone moved like they were tiptoeing around an emotional spill on the floor, afraid that one wrong step would make it worse. You might think silence is neutral. It's not. Silence is communication. It says, I don't feel safe enough to speak. And when silence repeats every morning, it slowly rewrites the rules of the relationship. At the breakfast table, we talked about logistics only. Who would drive the kids? What time school started? Whether we were out of milk. Short sentences. Efficient. Almost professional. If you're learning English, you know this level well. Survival English. Enough to function, not enough to connect. And that's the trap. In relationships, just like in language learning, functioning is not the same as living. You can survive on basic phrases for a while. But without expression, curiosity, and risk, everything becomes flat. What surprised me most was how quickly my brain adapted to the silence. After just a few days, it started to feel normal, comfortable, even. This is something behavioral science explains clearly. Humans adapt fast. Your nervous system recalibrates. What felt painful on day 1 feels familiar by day 5. And familiar often gets mistaken for fine. Your brain loves predictability. It will choose a dull, unhappy routine over an uncertain conversation every time. Not because it's wise, but because it's efficient. I noticed my body doing strange things in the mornings. Tight shoulders. Shallow breathing. A constant low-level tension, like a phone vibrating in my pocket that I couldn't turn off. Stress hormones don't need arguments to activate. They respond to emotional ambiguity, to not knowing where you stand. Children pick up on this immediately. One morning, my child asked a simple question that landed like a brick. Why are you both so quiet? No accusation. Just observation. Kids are scientists like that. They collect data without judgment. We smiled. We said, we're just tired. And maybe that was partly true. But it wasn't the whole truth. And when adults give half-truths long enough, children learn to read between the lines. Psychologists call this emotional climate. You don't need words to set it. Your tone, your pauses, your avoidance do the job. A tense emotional climate teaches everyone in the house to shrink a little. Here's where this connects directly to learning English. Many people fail not because they don't study, but because they practice shrinking. They choose safe sentences. They avoid speaking when unsure. They listen passively but never risk response. Over time, this becomes a habit. A morning silence of language learning. During those mornings, I caught myself doing the same thing with English internally. My thoughts became shorter, simpler, less curious. Stress reduces cognitive flexibility. When your emotional brain is overloaded, your learning brain goes offline. There's science behind this. Chronic stress narrows attention. It pushes the brain into survival mode. Language learning, however, requires play, mistakes, exploration. Exactly the things stress kills first. So there we were. A family moving efficiently through quiet mornings, while underneath, connection was slowly leaking away. And the scariest part? No one was yelling. No one was crying. From the outside, everything looked stable. This is often where people give up on love and on English. Because there's no dramatic failure to react to. Just a slow fading of energy. One morning, as I stood at the sink washing a mug I hadn't even used, I noticed my reflection in the window. I looked older than I remembered. Not in years, but in posture. My shoulders curved inward, like I was apologizing to the day before it even started. That's when it hit me. Silence isn't peaceful when it's built on fear. It's just avoidance wearing a calm mask. If you're listening to this and your English feels stuck, ask yourself a gentle question. Have your learning mornings become silent? Do you open a lesson, scroll a little, then close it without speaking? Do you tell yourself you're busy when you're actually avoiding discomfort? The brain uses the same trick in every area of life. It replaces engagement with routine. It replaces growth with maintenance. That morning silence was not the problem. It was the symptom. A signal that something needed attention, not avoidance. And here's the soft but sharp truth. Silence doesn't protect love. It starves it. Just like English, love doesn't disappear because you're bad at it. It disappears because you stop practicing out loud. Words we couldn't say. There is a strange moment that happens when words are available, but you don't use them. You can feel the sentence forming in your head, clear and complete, and yet it never makes it to your mouth. It just circles there, like a bird that refuses to land. That was the emotional state of our house during those days. Full of unspoken sentences. Heavy with things we couldn't say. You might think the hardest part of communication is finding the right words. It's not. The hardest part is believing that saying them won't make things worse. When trust feels fragile, silence starts to look like kindness, like restraint, like maturity. But most of the time, it's just fear dressed up as control. In my head, the words were simple. I feel lonely. I'm scared. I don't know how to fix this. Basic sentences. Beginner-level English. The kind you learn in the first weeks. Subject. Verb. Feeling. Nothing complicated. And yet, saying them felt impossible. This is something linguists and psychologists both agree on. Emotion and language share the same neural pathways. When emotion is blocked, language suffers. That's why people forget words when they're nervous. That's why your mind goes blank during important conversations. Your brain isn't broken. It's overwhelmed. I noticed something ironic. When I practiced English alone, listening, repeating, shadowing sentences, I felt calm, safe. But real conversation, real emotional risk, shut me down. And marriage, at that moment, felt like the most advanced language test I had ever failed. At home, we replaced real conversation with practical noise. The TV stayed on longer. Phones were checked more often. Background sound filled the space where honesty should have been. This is a common avoidance strategy. The brain hates emotional uncertainty, so it adds stimulation to distract itself. If you're learning English, you've probably done this too. Playing videos faster. Skipping speaking parts. Telling yourself listening is enough. It feels productive, but it's really hiding. One evening, I almost said something. My partner was sitting across from me, scrolling on their phone. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. My brain flooded me with predictions. You'll sound weak. You'll start a fight. You'll regret this. Neuroscience calls this threat forecasting. Your brain simulates worst-case scenarios to stop you from acting. It's incredibly convincing. And often completely wrong. What we couldn't say started to stack up. Each unsaid sentence became heavier than the last. Silence doesn't erase words. It stores them. And stored words turn into tension. Our children felt it. One of them became quieter. Another started asking for attention in small, persistent ways. Research shows that children often externalize the emotions adults suppress. They act out what we refuse to speak. This is where language matters most. Not perfect language. Honest language. Broken sentences are better than perfect silence. Think about how you learned your first language. You didn't wait until sentences were elegant. You spoke when you were messy, emotional, incomplete. Communication came before correctness. Somewhere along the way, we forget this. In marriage, we wait for the right moment. In English, we wait for better skills. And waiting becomes a lifelong delay. There's a psychological concept called emotional avoidance. It feels like patience. It feels like self-control. But long-term, it increases anxiety and disconnection. Studies show that couples who avoid difficult conversations experience more distress than those who argue openly. Conflict, when respectful, is actually a sign of engagement. The same is true in language learning. Struggling out loud is engagement. Silence is withdrawal. I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't protecting my partner by staying quiet. I was protecting my ego. I didn't want to feel clumsy. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. I wanted emotional fluency before emotional honesty. But fluency doesn't come first. Practice does. One night, lying in bed, I replayed every sentence I hadn't said. They sounded so reasonable in my head. So calm. So clear. And yet, by not speaking them, I had turned them into something else entirely. Resentment doesn't need loud words. It grows in quiet spaces. If you're listening to this and your English feels trapped inside you, consider this gently. Maybe your problem isn't vocabulary. Maybe it's permission. Permission to sound imperfect. Permission to be seen trying. Because here's the punchline no one likes. Relationships don't need better words. They need braver ones. And English doesn't improve when you think harder. It improves when you speak, even when your voice shakes. What we couldn't say was slowly changing us. Not because the words were dangerous, but because silence was teaching us to disappear. Children watching quietly. There is a dangerous myth adults love to repeat. The kids don't notice. We say it to comfort ourselves, the way people close their eyes during a scary movie and pretend the monster has gone away. But children notice everything. Especially the things you don't say. Especially the tension you think you're hiding. During those 2 weeks, our children became quieter in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not calm. Not focused. quiet like they were listening for something. You could feel it in the house, like a pause that never ended. You might think children need words to understand what's happening. They don't. Their brains are built for pattern detection. They track tone, timing, distance. A delayed response. A missing smile. A conversation that ends too quickly. To a child's nervous system, these are data points. One morning, as we were getting ready for school, I noticed my child tying their shoes much slower than usual. Overly careful. As if time itself had become fragile. When I asked if everything was okay, the answer came fast. Too fast. I'm fine. Perfect grammar. Perfect tone. Completely unconvincing. This is something developmental psychologists talk about often. Children mirror emotional strategies. When adults avoid, children learn avoidance. When adults go silent, children learn that silence equals safety. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. We were teaching emotional English at home without realizing it. Not the kind you learn from books, but the kind you learn by watching. The grammar of love. The punctuation of conflict. The pauses that mean more than sentences. At dinner, conversation stayed shallow. School facts. Food comments. Nothing personal. The kids followed our lead. They filled the silence with chewing and nodding. No one asked real questions. Everyone survived the meal. From the outside, it probably looked like a peaceful family dinner. Inside, it felt like everyone was holding their breath. Neuroscience explains why children react this way. A child's brain prioritizes safety over expression. When the emotional environment feels uncertain, their system shifts into monitoring mode. They become alert, observant, less playful, less spontaneous. If you've ever tried to learn English while stressed, you know this state well. Your brain stops experimenting. You stick to safe structures. You avoid jokes. You avoid long sentences. You become careful. That's what our children were doing. Being careful. One evening, while helping with homework, my child asked a question that wasn't really about homework. Do people stop loving each other? It was asked casually. Light tone. But the question itself was heavy. In that moment, I realized something painful. Our silence was louder than any argument could have been. Because arguments at least name the problem. Silence leaves children alone with their imagination. And imagination, without reassurance, usually goes to the worst place. Research supports this. Studies show that children exposed to unresolved parental conflict, especially the quiet kind, experience higher anxiety than those who witness open but repaired disagreements. Repair matters more than perfection. And repair requires language. This is where the connection to learning English becomes very real. Many adults think they need confidence before they speak. Children do the opposite. They speak before they're confident. That's why they learn faster. They treat language as a tool, not a test. Somewhere along the way, we reverse that. We wait. We hide. We protect ourselves. And our children learn that too. I noticed my kids starting to whisper more, asking questions indirectly, watching faces before speaking. These are not personality traits. They are adaptations. Our home had become an advanced listening exercise. Everyone listening. No one speaking. Psychologists call this hypervigilance. It's the brain's way of staying safe in uncertain emotional environments. It's useful in emergencies. Harmful when it becomes daily life. And here's the hard truth. Children don't need perfect parents. They need visible repair. They need to see adults try, fail, speak, and reconnect. That's how they learn emotional fluency. Language learning works the same way. You don't learn by avoiding mistakes. You learn by making them out loud and surviving them. That night, after the kids went to bed, the house felt heavier than usual. The quiet had changed. It wasn't just between two adults anymore. It had spread. Like a fog. I sat there and thought about what we were teaching without meaning to. That love is fragile. That silence is safer than honesty. That problems disappear if you don't name them. And none of those lessons were true. If you're listening to this and learning English, ask yourself something gently. Who is watching you learn? A child? A partner? Or maybe just your future self? What are you teaching them about fear and effort? Because here's the punchline that stings a little. Children don't learn how to speak from what you say. They learn from what you avoid. And the same goes for you. Our kids were watching quietly. And that quiet was asking us to choose a different language. The almost divorce night. There are nights that feel ordinary until you look back and realize they split your life into a before and an after. No thunder. No screaming. Just a quiet understanding that something is about to change. That was the night we almost divorced. The house was finally still. Children asleep. Lights dimmed. The kind of silence that usually signals rest. But this time, it felt like a courtroom after everyone has left. Decisions already made. Words already judged. We sat in the same room, not looking at each other. Distance measured in feet, but felt in miles. If you've ever avoided eye contact with someone you love, you know how exhausting that is. Your body stays alert, like it's preparing for impact. I remember thinking very clearly, this could be the end. Not dramatically. Not with panic. Just a calm sentence forming in my head. And calm thoughts can be the most dangerous ones. They don't feel like emergencies. They feel reasonable. Psychologists call this emotional resignation. It happens when people stop fighting not because they don't care, but because caring feels too expensive. Your brain decides that withdrawal is cheaper than effort. We started talking in low voices. Careful words. No accusations. No raised tones. Almost polite. That's often how relationships end, not with explosions, but with well-organized sadness. Every sentence felt like walking across thin ice. You test each word before you place weight on it. You keep things vague. You avoid naming feelings directly. And yet, beneath all of it, the real question hovered in the air: should we stop trying? This is where many people expect clarity, a big realization. But what actually happens is confusion. Emotional overload reduces your ability to think long-term. The brain narrows its focus to immediate relief. Divorce, in that moment, looked like relief. An exit. A way to stop the tension. Not a solution. Just an ending. This is something behavioral science explains well. When stress is high, the brain seeks escape, not growth. That's why people quit gyms, jobs, languages, and relationships at the peak of frustration. The pain of staying temporarily feels worse than the unknown pain of leaving. And here's the uncomfortable parallel. This is the same mental state where people give up on English. I've tried. It's not for me. I'm too old. These sentences don't describe reality. They describe exhaustion. That night, we talked about logistics again. Living arrangements. Schedules. The kids. Notice how quickly the mind jumps to planning when emotions feel unsafe. Planning feels productive. It feels controlled. It avoids vulnerability. But planning a separation doesn't mean you've emotionally accepted it. It just means you're trying to calm your nervous system. At one point, there was a long pause. Not awkward. Heavy. The kind of pause where you can hear your own heartbeat. And in that space, something strange happened. The idea of not seeing my children every morning hit me, not as a concept, but as a physical sensation. A tightening in my chest. A sudden warmth behind my eyes. Emotion broke through logic. Neuroscience shows that strong emotional imagery can override avoidance patterns. When the brain connects a decision to a vivid emotional cost, it hesitates. It reconsiders. I didn't say anything right away. Neither did my partner. We were both sitting with the weight of what separation would actually mean, beyond paperwork and words. This is the moment people rarely talk about. The almost moment. Where you're close enough to quitting that you can feel the edge, but not so far that you can't step back. And here's the truth, almost quitting is not failure. It's feedback. It tells you something needs to change, not necessarily end. But feedback is uncomfortable. It demands effort. And effort feels unfair when you're tired. That night, we didn't decide to stay together forever. We didn't promise anything dramatic. We didn't solve our problems. What we did was smaller, and somehow harder. We paused the exit. We chose not to decide while our nervous systems were flooded. Psychologists often advise couples not to make life-altering decisions during peak emotional arousal. Your brain simply isn't built for it. This applies to learning too. Quitting English at your most frustrated moment is rarely a rational choice. It's a stress response. We agreed on one thing only: to slow down. To stop treating the relationship like a problem to be solved and start treating it like a system under stress. That's a subtle shift, but a powerful one. Systems don't need blame. They need adjustment. As I lay in bed that night, sleep refused to come. My mind replayed every word, every pause. But beneath the noise, there was something new. Not hope. Not yet. Just space. A little breathing room where an ending had almost happened. And here's the quiet punchline that stays with me. Most relationships don't end because love disappears. They end because exhaustion convinces you that escape is the same as peace. That night, we didn't choose love. We chose not to quit while we were overwhelmed. And sometimes, that's the most honest fight for love there is. Why we stop trying. There is a moment, usually quiet, when effort starts to feel offensive. When trying again doesn't feel brave anymore, it feels stupid. That moment is where most people stop. Not just in love. In everything. And if you've ever wondered why motivation disappears even when something matters deeply to you, this is the part you've been living in. After the almost divorce night, nothing magically improved. There was no emotional sunrise. Just tired people waking up again. And yet, something invisible had shifted. We were no longer asking, "Do we love each other?" We were asking a more honest question: why does trying feel so hard? This question matters. Because humans don't stop trying because they're lazy. They stop because their nervous system is overloaded. Psychology explains this with brutal clarity. When effort doesn't lead to immediate reward, the brain starts to conserve energy. It reduces motivation. It numbs curiosity. This is called learned helplessness. Originally studied in animals, but painfully common in humans. You try. You don't see change. You try again. Still nothing. Eventually, your brain concludes, effort is pointless. And once that belief settles in, even small actions feel exhausting. This is true in marriage. You talk. It doesn't help. You explain. It's misunderstood. You adjust. The tension returns. After enough cycles, effort feels humiliating. It's also true in learning English. You study. You forget. You speak. You make mistakes. People don't understand you. Progress feels invisible. So your brain quietly suggests a deal. Let's stop. It hurts less. The brain isn't evil. It's efficient. It wants to minimize pain and energy use. Unfortunately, growth requires both. In those days, I noticed how often my mind offered escape fantasies. Not dramatic ones. Small ones. Being alone. Less responsibility. Fewer conversations. Silence without meaning. These thoughts weren't about freedom. They were about relief. Cognitive science shows that under chronic stress, people overvalue short-term relief and undervalue long-term fulfillment. That's why quitting feels good for about 5 minutes. Trying, on the other hand, feels awkward, vulnerable, slow. We don't talk enough about the shame of trying, especially as adults. Children try openly. Adults want competence before action, but competence only comes after action. In my marriage, Trying meant saying things without knowing the outcome. It meant risking rejection. In English, trying means speaking before you're fluent. Risking sounding wrong. And here's the twist. The brain interprets both as social threat. Social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. That's not a metaphor. It's measurable. So when you avoid speaking, avoid apologizing, avoid restarting, your brain is protecting you from perceived pain. It's choosing comfort over connection. But comfort has a cost. After the breaking point, I started paying attention to micromoments. Not big decisions. Small ones. Eye contact. Tone. Timing. These are the places where effort hides. Effort is not grand gestures. It's staying present when your brain wants to disappear. One morning, instead of staying silent, I said one simple sentence. Not emotional. Not deep. Just present. And it felt strangely heavy, like lifting a weight that had been untouched for too long. That's another truth neuroscience confirms. When you stop using a skill, emotional or linguistic, the neural pathways weaken. Restarting feels harder than starting fresh. But here's the hopeful part. The brain is plastic. It rebuilds quickly when you repeat small actions consistently. This is why language learning advice often fails. People are told to practice more, without understanding the emotional cost of practice. Practice requires tolerating discomfort. And discomfort feels like danger to an untrained nervous system. The same applies to relationships. People say, you just have to work on it, without acknowledging how unsafe effort can feel when trust is shaken. We stop trying because trying reminds us of past failures. Our brain uses memory as evidence. It says, last time you tried it hurt. What it doesn't say is, last time you stopped, you slowly disappeared. There's research showing that resilience is not about positivity. It's about recovery time. How quickly you return to effort after withdrawal. Not never stopping. Just restarting sooner. That idea changed something for me. Trying didn't have to mean forever. It could mean today. One sentence. One moment of presence. One imperfect attempt. The pressure to fix everything is what kills effort. When you shrink the goal, the nervous system relaxes. If you're listening to this and English feels impossible, stop asking, will I ever be fluent? Ask, can I say one sentence today out loud? If your relationship feels heavy, stop asking, will this work? Ask, can I show up for 5 minutes without armor? Here's the quiet punchline that reframes everything. We don't stop trying because we don't care. We stop because caring costs energy we're afraid we don't have. But energy doesn't come from quitting. It comes from movement. Even small, awkward movement. Trying is not a personality trait. It's a skill. And skills come back faster than you think when you stop punishing yourself for needing a restart. A small, honest moment. Big changes are overrated. They look good in movies, but real life usually moves on quieter feet. What actually shifts the direction of a relationship is often something so small it feels almost embarrassing to call it a turning point. And yet, that's exactly what happened to us. Not with a speech. Not with a promise. But with a single, honest moment that lasted less than a minute. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. No special mood. No dramatic setup. The kids were in another room. The house was still messy in that familiar, lived-in way. Nothing felt resolved. And maybe that's why it worked. I was standing by the counter, pretending to be busy with something that didn't matter. That's what people do when they want to talk but don't want to admit it. My partner was nearby, also pretending. Two adults orbiting each other, both afraid to be the first to drop the mask. You might think honesty begins with confidence. It doesn't. It begins with discomfort. The sentence came out wrong. The tone wasn't perfect. The timing was awkward. And yet, it landed. Not because it was elegant, but because it was real. I don't know how to fix this, but I miss us. That was it. No explanation. No defense. No strategy. That sentence wasn't a solution. It was a signal. Psychology tells us that vulnerability is a social glue. When someone speaks without armor, it invites reciprocity. Not immediately. Not magically. But it shifts the emotional equation. What surprised me most was my own reaction. I felt lighter the second the words left my mouth. Not because the problem was solved, but because I was no longer carrying the weight alone. Silence isolates. Speech shares the load. This is something language teachers understand well. Saying a sentence out loud, even incorrectly, releases mental pressure. Keeping it inside increases it. The brain relaxes when expression happens. My partner didn't respond with a perfect answer. There was a pause. Then a nod. Then a quiet, "Me too." Two simple words. Beginner level. Emotionally advanced. That moment didn't fix our marriage. But it changed the direction. It moved us from parallel isolation to shared uncertainty. And shared uncertainty is still connection. There's science behind why small honest moments matter more than big emotional events. The nervous system learns safety through repetition, not intensity. One calm, honest interaction teaches the brain more than 10 dramatic apologies followed by silence. In trauma research, this is called co-regulation. When two people regulate their emotions together, trust slowly rebuilds. Not through logic. Through felt experience. The same principle applies to learning English. You don't gain fluency by memorizing more rules. You gain it by surviving small speaking moments and realizing nothing terrible happens. After that sentence, something subtle changed in the house. Not happiness. Not joy. Space. Breathing room. The tension didn't disappear, but it softened. Like a knot that loosens just enough for blood to flow again. I noticed myself speaking more during the day. Not deep talks. Simple comments. Observations. Human noise. And each small exchange added a brick back into the bridge between us. This is how relationships actually heal. Not in declarations, but in accumulation. The brain tracks patterns. When it sees repeated moments of safety, it lowers its guard. It allows curiosity back in. Playfulness returns slowly. Just like in language learning. If you've ever had a breakthrough in English, you know it rarely comes from studying harder. It comes from one conversation that goes okay. Not perfect. Just okay. And suddenly, your confidence shifts. That's what happened here. The small honest moment became proof that speaking wouldn't destroy us. There's a common myth that honesty must be complete and total. That you need to say everything. You don't. You need to say something real. Something now. Something small enough that your nervous system can handle it. In fact, research shows that gradual self-disclosure builds stronger bonds than emotional dumping. Trust grows in steps, not leaps. That one sentence also changed how I approached English practice. I stopped aiming for fluency. I aimed for honesty. One clear sentence. One genuine attempt. No performance. And strangely, learning felt easier. If you're listening to this and waiting for the right moment to speak, whether in love or in English, this is your reminder. The right moment is rarely comfortable. It's just available. Here's the quiet punchline that carries more power than it looks. Healing doesn't begin when you know what to say. It begins when you say something true before you're ready. That small, honest moment didn't save our marriage. But it made saving it possible. Learning to speak again. There is a strange kind of fear that appears after things almost fall apart. Not the loud fear of losing something, but the quiet fear of trying again. Because once you've seen how close you were to the edge, every step forward feels careful. Deliberate. As if the ground might crack again if you move too fast. That was the emotional landscape we were standing on when we started learning how to speak again. Not big conversations. Not emotional marathons. Just speaking. Slowly. Intentionally. Like beginners. You might expect that after an almost divorce, couples either talk everything out or avoid each other completely. Reality sits in between. You talk, but carefully. You choose words like you're walking on ice. And that's not weakness. That's awareness. I realized something important during those days. We weren't failing at communication because we didn't care. We were failing because we had forgotten how to speak without defending ourselves. Every sentence carried armor. Every word was shaped to avoid pain. So we decided to change one rule. Not consciously at first. It just happened. We slowed down. When one of us spoke, the other didn't interrupt. Not to correct. Not to explain. Not to defend. Just to listen. It felt unnatural. Uncomfortable. Silence returned, but this time it wasn't avoidance. It was space. In language learning, slowing down is often seen as regression. People want faster speech, faster comprehension, faster progress. But neuroscience says the opposite. Slower processing allows deeper integration. The brain needs time to map sound, meaning, and emotion together. The same applies to emotional language. When conversations slow down, the nervous system relaxes. It exits fight or flight mode. It becomes available for connection. I noticed how much clearer my thoughts became when I didn't rush to respond. I noticed how my partner's tone softened when they weren't bracing for interruption. Speaking became less about winning and more about being understood. We started using simpler sentences, shorter phrases, clear emotions. I felt overwhelmed today. I need quiet right now. I appreciate that. These aren't sophisticated expressions. They're foundational. It reminded me of early English lessons. Subject, verb, feeling, nothing fancy. And just like in language learning, clarity beat complexity every time. There's research supporting this. Studies on couples show that emotional clarity predicts relationship satisfaction more than emotional intensity. Being understood feels safer than being impressive. The brain craves safety before it allows intimacy. As we practiced speaking again, something else changed. We laughed. Not big laughs. Small ones. Accidental humor. Shared observations. These moments weren't planned. They emerged because tension had lowered enough for play to return. Play is a sign of safety. In both children and adults. This is why learning English through stories works so well. Stories reduce pressure. They invite curiosity. They allow mistakes to hide inside meaning. You're not performing. You're participating. Our home slowly shifted from a silent listening exercise to a speaking practice space. Mistakes happened. Misunderstandings still occurred. But the fear around them lessened. And fear is the real barrier to fluency. Not grammar. Not vocabulary. One evening, I realized I was speaking more freely in English too. Not because I had studied more, but because my emotional state had changed. Stress blocks language. Safety unlocks it. This connection is rarely talked about. But emotional regulation is a prerequisite for learning. When your nervous system feels threatened, it shuts down non-essential functions. Language is considered non-essential in survival mode. That's why yelling doesn't help communication. And why pressure doesn't help learning. By learning to speak again at home, I was retraining my brain to tolerate vulnerability. That tolerance transferred to English practice naturally. If you've ever felt like your English disappears when you need it most, it's not because you forgot. It's because your nervous system hit the brakes. Slowing down is not falling behind. It's rebuilding the foundation. We didn't schedule talk time. We didn't force progress. We allowed conversation to return organically. One sentence at a time. One safe exchange at a time. And that's how fluency actually grows. Not through intensity, but through consistency. Here's the punchline that reframes everything. You don't relearn how to speak by talking more. You relearn it by feeling safe enough to speak slowly. Whether it's love or language, Speed comes later. Connection comes first. Science of emotional repair. There's a comforting lie we like to believe when things start to heal. That healing is emotional. That it's about love, intention, or willpower. Those things matter, but they are not the engine. The engine is biology. And once you understand what's happening inside your brain and body, emotional repair stops feeling mysterious and starts feeling possible. After we began speaking again, slowly and imperfectly, I noticed something subtle. My body felt different. Less tight. Breathing deeper without thinking about it. Shoulders dropping on their own. These weren't emotional changes. They were physiological. Neuroscience explains this clearly. Emotional repair begins in the nervous system, not in conversation. Before your brain can process words as connection, it must feel safe. Without safety, language is interpreted as threat. This is why calm voices work better than logical arguments. And why explaining harder often makes things worse. The autonomic nervous system has two main modes that matter here. One prepares you to fight or flee. The other allows rest, connection, and learning. When you're stressed, your body prioritizes survival. Love becomes secondary. Language becomes inefficient. This is not a personal failure. It's design. When our marriage was under stress, both of us were operating in survival mode. Every word was scanned for danger. Every silence felt loaded. Our brains weren't listening to understand. They were listening to defend. This is why saying the right thing at the wrong time fails. Timing is biological, not moral. Emotional repair begins when the nervous system downshifts. That can happen through tone, pacing, facial expression, and predictability. Not through persuasion. One simple change we made without realizing it was predictability. Small routines. Consistent behaviors. Gentle check-ins. These signaled safety to the brain. And when the brain feels safe, it allows openness. There's a concept in psychology called neuroplasticity. It means the brain changes based on repeated experience. Not single moments. Patterns. One honest conversation doesn't heal a relationship. But repeated safe interactions retrain the brain's threat detection system. The same applies to learning English. One good conversation doesn't make you fluent. But repeated low-stress speaking moments rewire how your brain processes language. Stress and learning are enemies. Cortisol, the stress hormone, impairs memory formation. Dopamine, associated with reward and curiosity, enhances it. You don't learn better by pushing harder. You learn better by feeling safer. This explains why many adults feel blocked in English. It's not a lack of intelligence. It's chronic performance anxiety. Once I understood this, my frustration shifted. Instead of blaming myself or my partner, I started asking a different question. What would make this moment feel safer? That question changed everything. Safety doesn't mean comfort. It means predictability without threat. You can feel uncomfortable and still safe. That distinction matters. We began repairing emotionally not by discussing the past, but by regulating the present. Slower voices, longer pauses, softer expressions. These are not romantic gestures. They are nervous system cues. And they work. Studies on couples therapy show that successful repair often comes from non-verbal alignment before verbal problem-solving. Eye contact, matching breathing rhythms, similar posture. These synchronize nervous systems. Once synchronized, language flows more easily. This is why people suddenly speak English better with friends than in interviews. Safety unlocks access. I also noticed that when I felt calmer at home, my English listening improved. I caught more words. I understood nuance. Not because the audio was easier, but because my brain wasn't busy defending itself. Learning requires openness. Openness requires safety. This reframes how we think about effort. Pushing harder is often the wrong strategy. Creating the right conditions matters more. If you're learning English, don't ask, "How many hours should I study?" Ask, "How can I reduce pressure while practicing?" Slow audio. Familiar topics. Repetition without judgment. If you're repairing a relationship, don't ask, "How do I fix this?" Ask, "How do we feel safe enough to stay present?" Here's the punchline that makes science feel personal. Emotional repair isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about calming what's afraid. Once fear relaxes, connection doesn't need to be forced. It returns on its own, like a language you never truly forgot, only stopped using under stress. Choosing effort over escape. There's a moment after things calm down when escape still whispers. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to remind you it's there. Escape doesn't disappear when relationships start healing. It just changes tone. It stops sounding like anger and starts sounding like logic. And that's when it becomes dangerous. After we understood what was happening in our nervous systems, after the house felt a little lighter, the question returned in a new form. Not should we leave, but is this worth the effort? That question sounds reasonable, intelligent, even, but it hides a trap. Effort feels unfair when you're already tired. And tired people are very good at convincing themselves that walking away is self-respect. Psychology calls this cognitive reframing. The brain justifies avoidance by giving it a noble name. Protecting my peace. Choosing myself. Not forcing things. These phrases are not wrong. They're just incomplete. Because effort and self-respect are not opposites. Escape and peace are not the same. Choosing effort over escape doesn't mean staying in pain. It means staying present long enough to see whether change is possible. The brain hates uncertainty more than discomfort. That's why it prefers clear endings. Endings reduce ambiguity. Effort extends it. In those days, I noticed how often my mind drifted toward simpler futures. Less responsibility. Fewer conversations. More control. These fantasies weren't about happiness. They were about predictability. Neuroscience shows that under stress, the brain seeks certainty. Even negative certainty feels safer than uncertain improvement. This is why people quit languages at the intermediate level. The beginner stage has clear progress. The advanced stage has mastery. The middle is messy, slow, ambiguous. So people leave. Relationships work the same way. The middle stage, after romance before stability, is where effort matters most. And where escape looks tempting. Choosing effort doesn't feel heroic. It feels mundane, repetitive, slightly annoying. Effort looks like showing up when there's no emotional reward yet. Like practicing English when you still make the same mistakes. Like staying in a conversation that doesn't end with clarity. We made a quiet agreement. Not spoken out loud. Just felt. To choose presence over fantasy. That meant when things felt awkward, we didn't retreat into phones. When conversations felt heavy, we didn't change the subject immediately. When misunderstandings happened, we didn't treat them as proof of failure. This wasn't dramatic work. It was boring work. And boring work is the hardest to sustain. The brain loves novelty. Escape offers novelty. Effort offers repetition. And repetition doesn't trigger dopamine easily. But here's what behavioral science teaches us. Meaning doesn't come from pleasure. It comes from investment. The more effort you invest, the more value your brain assigns. This is called effort justification. We value what we work for. The same is true in language learning. When English comes easily, it's forgettable. When you struggle for a sentence and finally get it out, it sticks. I noticed something unexpected. As we chose effort repeatedly, even when it felt pointless, small wins started appearing. A conversation that ended gently. A shared laugh that wasn't forced. A moment of understanding. These moments didn't feel dramatic. They felt earned. Effort also changed how we argued. Conflict became information instead of threat. Disagreement wasn't evidence that things were broken. It was data. That shift matters. Because when effort is chosen, problems stop being exit signs and start being maps. If you're learning English, think about how often you interpret confusion as a reason to stop. What if confusion is actually proof you're in the right place? If you're in a relationship, think about how often discomfort makes you question everything. What if discomfort is simply part of growth? Choosing effort doesn't guarantee success. But escape guarantees stagnation. That's the part no one says out loud. The brain will always offer escape when effort feels slow. That's not intuition. That's habit. You don't silence the escape voice by arguing with it. You silence it by acting anyway. One small effort at a time. Here's the punchline that reframes effort completely. Effort isn't what you do when you believe. It's what creates belief. We didn't choose effort because we were sure. We chose it because escape had already shown us where it led. What love looks like now. Love after almost losing it doesn't look like the movies. It doesn't glow. It doesn't announce itself with music or dramatic reunions. It looks quieter, more ordinary, and somehow more honest. This is what our love looks like now. Mornings are still mornings. Coffee still goes cold sometimes. The house is still loud when it shouldn't be and quiet when it should be louder. But the silence has changed its meaning. It no longer feels like avoidance. It feels like rest. We speak more, but we also pause more. Conversations don't rush toward conclusions. There's less pressure to fix, more space to notice. That shift alone changes everything. I used to think love was about emotional intensity, big feelings, big gestures. But intensity burns fast. What sustains love is regulation. The ability to stay present when nothing exciting is happening. Psychology calls this secure attachment. Not constant closeness. Reliable availability. Knowing the other person is there, even when emotions fluctuate. That reliability shows up in small ways. A question asked without suspicion. A response given without defensiveness. A disagreement that doesn't spiral into threat. These moments don't trend on social media. They don't make good stories. But they build something stronger than romance. They build trust. Our children noticed the change before we named it. They became louder again. More playful. Less careful. Their nervous systems relaxed as ours did. This is one of the most powerful indicators of relational health. When children feel safe, they expand. They explore. They speak freely. And that's when it hit me. Love isn't just what you feel for someone. It's the emotional environment you create together. That environment affects everything. Mood. Learning. Creativity. Language. I noticed my English improving without effort. Not because I studied more, but because my mental space was clearer. Less noise. Less fear. This is something educators rarely talk about. Emotional stability accelerates learning. When your life feels regulated, your brain has more capacity for growth. Love now looks like effort without drama. Like choosing to ask instead of assume. Like noticing when stress is rising and responding with curiosity instead of control. We still misunderstand each other. We still get tired. But misunderstandings are no longer emergencies. They're conversations waiting to happen. That shift matters more than any technique. There's research showing that couples who thrive long-term are not those who avoid conflict, but those who repair quickly. Repair doesn't mean perfect apologies. It means returning to connection sooner. That's what love looks like now. Faster repair. Less distance. The same principle applies to learning English. Fluency doesn't come from never making mistakes. It comes from recovering quickly after them. If you hesitate less after mispronouncing a word, you improve faster. If you hesitate less after an awkward conversation, relationships deepen faster. I've stopped chasing a version of love that feels impressive. I'm building one that feels sustainable. And sustainability is boring in the best way. It doesn't spike emotions. It steadies them. That steadiness creates space. Space to learn. Space to listen. Space to grow. If you're listening to this and wondering whether effort is worth it, look at the life effort creates. Not fireworks. Foundations. Here's the punchline that changes how you see everything. Love doesn't feel exciting when it's working. It feels safe. And safety, unlike excitement, compounds. What love looks like now isn't perfect. It's practiced. And practice, whether in love or language, is what turns effort into something that finally feels like home. Would you fight too? There's a question that stays with you after everything quiets down. After the tension softens. After the effort becomes routine. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand an answer. It simply waits. Would you fight too? Not fight like in the movies. Not dramatic speeches or grand sacrifices. But the quieter fight. The one that happens when no one is watching. When quitting would be easier. When silence would cost less energy than trying again. 2 weeks ago, I didn't think I'd be asking myself this question. I thought love either survived or it didn't. I thought marriages ended because something was missing. I was wrong. Most of the time, nothing is missing. People are just exhausted. And exhaustion is convincing. Exhaustion tells you stories. It tells you you've tried enough. It tells you this is just how things are. It tells you that walking away is maturity, not avoidance. And if you don't slow down and listen carefully, you start believing it. Here's what I learned the hard way. Love rarely asks for everything at once. It asks for today. This conversation. This pause. This effort. The same is true for learning English. People quit not because English is impossible, but because they expect fluency to arrive before patience runs out. They fight for a while, then get tired of fighting. But fighting doesn't have to feel like war. When I look back at those 2 weeks, what saved us wasn't strength. It was willingness. Willingness to stay confused a little longer. Willingness to feel awkward. Willingness to speak before certainty arrived. You don't fight for love by being perfect. You fight by staying present when your brain begs you to disappear. Neuroscience backs this up. The brain is wired to avoid sustained discomfort. It constantly scans for exits. When you don't take the exit, when you stay and regulate instead, the brain updates its model of reality. It learns, this is uncomfortable, but not dangerous. That update is everything. It's how fear loosens its grip. It's how confidence forms. Not from success, but from survival. Think about the first time you spoke English out loud and didn't completely fail. Not brilliantly. Just survived. That moment changed your self-image. You became someone who could try. The same thing happens in love. After the almost divorce, I stopped asking myself, do I still feel in love? That question is unstable. Feelings change daily. Instead, I asked, can I stay engaged today? Engagement is measurable. Feelings are not. Staying engaged meant listening when it was boring, responding when it was inconvenient, speaking when silence felt safer. And slowly, something shifted. Not dramatically. Gradually. The way language grows. The way trust rebuilds. The way confidence returns. So when I ask you, would you fight too? I'm not asking if you'd stay in pain forever. I'm asking if you'd stay long enough to see whether pain is permanent or temporary. Most people never find out. They leave at the peak of discomfort. They quit at the edge of breakthrough. They confuse exhaustion with truth. If you're learning English right now and thinking of giving up, pause. Ask yourself one honest question. Are you incapable or just tired? If you're in a relationship that feels heavy, ask the same thing. Not is this perfect, but is this reparable? Repair doesn't feel good at first. It feels slow, clumsy, unimpressive. But repair builds something escape never will. And here's the part no one prepares you for. Fighting for love doesn't make you feel heroic. It makes you feel ordinary, human, real. You wake up. You try again. You fail a little less loudly. You learn to speak again. One sentence at a time. That's not weakness. That's practice. Love, like language, isn't maintained by talent. It's maintained by return. Returning after distance. Returning after silence. Returning after almost quitting. So would you fight too? Not with force. With presence. Not with certainty. With curiosity. Not forever. Just today. Because the deepest truth I learned in those 2 weeks is this. The moment you stop running is the moment growth finally catches up to you. And sometimes, staying is the bravest sentence you'll ever learn to say. Final closing. Don't leave just yet. There's a quiet moment that often gets misunderstood. Not when you are weak, but when you are about to understand something important. If this story touched you, even for a second, you might be standing right at the edge of change. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a small decision, to stay a little longer. Stay with your emotions. Stay with slow, clear English listening and speaking. Stay with yourself, even when you once wanted to quit. This channel doesn't promise fast English results. It helps you understand English through real stories, real feelings, so you can listen, speak, and actually use English with confidence. If you want to, practice English listening through stories. Improve natural English speaking without pressure. Learn slow, clear English for real life. And grow through stories that make you want to keep listening. Subscribe to the channel now. Turn on the notification bell. And leave a comment with one English sentence you learned today. I read and reply. The next video tells a story many people wish they had heard earlier. And maybe, it's waiting for you too. See you in the next story. Don't stop here.